G'day guys, welcome back to Fading Margins. I'm afraid the surroundings are not particularly salubrious, although I do notice, looking at the viewfinder, you can just make out my swag and some bicycle tyres and a pack there, and there's a few hand lamp hanging up. Lamp gets in the way somewhat. These aren't props, this is stuff I actually use, and this is where I store it in my garage. Unfortunately, I don't have a studio or a private piece of land that I can use, so I'm reduced, if I want to talk to you guys, to either go traipsing around the countryside, or I come out here, or wait till the house is quiet, which doesn't happen very often. Anyway, what I wanted to have a chat with you about today was romantic reasons for carrying a pocket knife. And Teddy Roosevelt, the famous US president, once said when he was in his mid-50s, about my age, and people questioned why he was going to South America, to the Amazon. They said, "You're an old man and you're a bit out of shape." And he said, "Well, it's my last chance to be a boy." And for me, carrying a pocket knife is very much like that. It's my last chance to be a boy. I think everybody should be entitled to carry a small folding knife in their pocket. A shut knife, as I found out the other day, is called in some quarters. Anyway, some very famous people have carried pocket knives, and I'm going to talk about two of them today, just very briefly. I'm not going to give you a history lesson or a bio or anything like that. Two very famous people, and you can actually see the pocket knives they carried because there are images available on the internet. And I'm going to recommend you a couple of books in case some of you are of a studious disposition or you want to read something that's actually worth reading. And the first person I want to talk about is one of my heroes, is Roald Amundsen. Now, in the Anglophone world, Roald Amundsen gets bad press because he was the first to the South Pole, and that may seem odd, but he beat Robert Falcon Scott to the South Pole by about a month. He got there on the 14th of December, 1911. And of course, as we all know, Robert Falcon Scott perished along with all his team on the return journey, man-hauling their equipment. Amundsen took dogs. Scott had taken ponies. Scott had taken petrol tractors, and ended up man-hauling, which was considered the height of noble masculine endeavour by the establishment in the UK at the time, and so when Amundsen got back, he was not the flavour of the month. Anyway, be that as it may, he is, without question, in my view, the greatest of the Arctic explorers of any time. This is a man who was first to the South Pole. He was the first to navigate the Northwest Passage. He navigated the Northeast Passage, and he was the first undisputed person to cross the North Pole, and he did that in an airship, of all things. So this is a man of extraordinary feats. And if you go on Google and you type in Amundsen's pocket knife, we find images of the knife he carried, the pocket knife he carried, not the fixed blade knife, to the South Pole. And it was very much like our old favourite, the Victorinox pocket knife. I don't think it wasn't, but it was very, very, very similar. The knife he had, as I say, had a spear point blade. It had a reamer and a corkscrew, just like this camper. Okay. It also had a can opener, the old-fashioned can opener, which I prefer, with the jaw that comes forward and the little lever, very similar to the replica that Victorinox is now making of their 1895, 1897 officer's knife. Unfortunately, they're asking £400 for this thing, this replica, which I think is a crying shame. It would be, to my mind, it's something that should be available to everybody at a reasonable cost. Perhaps they'll bring it into mass production. I don't know. It had some sort of cap lifter, and it had what looks like an auger, a small auger down one side. And this was the knife that Wisting used to sharpen the bamboo pole that they used to hoist the Norwegian flag at the South Pole when 4 of them stood there and held onto the pole. The pole had been sharpened at the tip using Amundsen's knife. It was a bamboo pole, and they drove it in on that day in December 1911. If you wanted to read about Amundsen, if you've never done that, the book I would recommend is quite recent. It's called by Stephen Bown. You see that? And it's called The Last Viking. Amundsen's a divisive character in some ways, and he's had some pretty shabby biographies made of him. He was not particularly conventional, and he kept some interesting company. There's another chap called Frederick Cook, and I could talk to you for ages about Frederick Cook. He was a doctor from New York who went on the Belgica expedition to the Antarctic. Brilliant man. Basically, him and Amundsen rescued the entire expedition when they were frozen in over winter. And yet Cook ended up in jail, in prison in America for fraud. And he found himself on the wrong side of the argument with Peary over who got to over the North Pole, who's claimed that he got to the North Pole. And yet Amundsen remained his friend for the entirety of his life and visited him in prison at the height of Amundsen's power. So The Last Viking by Stephen Bown is a great book. And for all you Victorinox aficionados, you can think to yourself, well, it may not have been a Victorinox, but it was something very, very similar that went all the way to the South Pole. And here's the thing, in a time when equipment and pastimes, activities, hobbies, whatever you want to call them, whatever it be, whether it be cycling or hiking or whatever it is, the equipment becomes fetishized. How many of us have gone out looking for the perfect pocket knife, gone out looking for the perfect pot, the perfect stove, whereas these men took the best they could find, but they took what they took. It was just a simple pocket knife. His fixed blade knife, Amundsen's fixed blade knife, was a very simple affair. It was just a puko, a wooden handled puko, and you can buy replicas of those from the museum, the Fram Museum in Oslo. Okay? And you can get yourself to Oslo, go to the Fram Museum. You'll be like a little kid. I was literally bouncing up and down, pogoing on the deck of this ship that had gone all the way to the South Pole and all the way across the Northeast Passage. Fantastic. The second person I want to talk to you about is an Englishman called George Mallory. And George Mallory and Andy Irvine, his American associate, perished on Everest in 1924. And there had been 3 expeditions to Everest, 1921, 1922, and 1924. The first one was a sort of fact-finding mission. They went up through Darjeeling into Tibet, across Tibet, until they got to that area of the Himalayas, and then they explored and they made maps and tried to work out the best way of attacking, assaulting the peak of Everest. In 1922 that process continued, and then in 1924 they started making some very serious attempts, getting up to some considerable heights. And then the final assault by Mallory and Irving, nobody knows whether they got there or not. And then very famously in the 2000s, Mallory's body was discovered on Everest. And amongst his effects, and again you can just Google it. So I'm not going to I may put links in the description below, but you can just Google it. He was carrying something just like this. Very dissimilar. I mean, it didn't have a black synthetic handle. I think it probably had a jigged bone handle, but it was a lamb's foot, a long lamb's foot in a very lightweight leather sleeve. This is an old Taylor's lamb's foot, Taylor's eye lamb's foot that I bought years and years ago in a hardware shop. I've hardly ever carried it. In fact, it sits in my reject box. Maybe I'll get an Arthur Wright and Sons and give it a bash. This one's stainless steel. His, of course, was carbon steel. And as I say, you can see pictures of it online. And you can buy the same pattern of knife online, or you can go to a shop and buy one, as I did. The same knife that Mallory took to Everest. And if you want to read about it, the book I'd recommend is Wade Davis, Into the Silence. This book is a masterpiece. It's enormous. It's not quite as big as it looks. The photographs, if I was to be critical, I'd say that the photographs, there could be more of them, and they could actually be in chronological sequence or in some shape or form, rather than dancing all over the place. But this man, I heard him first on YouTube, giving a talk, and I was very impressed. I looked him up, found the book, and you start this, you can't put it down. He is an extraordinarily gifted storyteller, and I can't recommend this book any more highly than that. So Wade Davis, Into the Silence, The Great War, Mallory, and the Conquest of Everest. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this little ramble through the past, this little adventure in pocket knife history, if you like. And as always, I wish you all health and happiness. And this is Steve, signing out.